The shadows crept across Zara Wilson's face as the cellar door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness so complete that for a moment she couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. The sound of the heavy iron lock sliding into place echoed like a death knell in the small, confined space. Only 3 weeks into her position as housekeeper at the grandest mansion in Julesburg, Colorado, and now she found herself imprisoned beneath it. "Mr. Hartford," Zara called out, her voice bouncing off stone walls that felt increasingly closer with each passing second. "Please, there must be some misunderstanding." But the only response was the fading sound of expensive boots ascending the wooden stairs back to the main house. It was 1878, and Julesburg was booming. The railroad had transformed what had once been little more than a stopping point along the Oregon Trail into a town of opportunity. That's what had drawn Zara west from Boston after her parents' deaths left her with nothing but debts and a desperate need for employment. 22 years old with no family and limited prospects, the advertisement for a housekeeper position at the Hartford estate had seemed like divine providence. Zara's fingers traced the cold stone walls in the darkness, searching for any weakness. Hartford House was the envy of Julesburg, a sprawling 2-story brick mansion with a cellar where the wealthy banker kept his wine collection. Now it was her prison, all because she had discovered the ledger, the one that showed clearly how Edmund Hartford had been systematically stealing from his clients, many of whom were humble farmers and ranchers who had entrusted him with their life savings. Hours passed in the darkness. The only light came from a tiny barred window near the ceiling, barely large enough to let in a sliver of moonlight. Zara huddled against the wall, drawing her knees to her chest, her navy blue dress providing little warmth against the cellar's chill. "He'll have to feed me eventually," she whispered to herself, though she wasn't entirely convinced. The look in Edmund Hartford's eyes when he'd caught her with the ledger had been cold, calculating. He was a man accustomed to solving problems permanently. Outside the Hartford mansion, Xavier Evans guided his horse down the main street of Julesburg. At 30 years old, he had spent more than half his life working cattle, his skin weathered by the sun and wind of the Colorado plains. He had come to town for supplies and to deliver a message to the banker, a warning, really. Several of the local ranchers were growing suspicious about the interest rates Hartford was charging and the way money seemed to vanish from their accounts. Xavier wasn't much for town business. He preferred the open range, the company of cattle, and the few ranch hands who worked for him at the modest spread he'd built 10 miles outside of town. But the Wilkins family had lost their ranch last month, and something about the way Hartford had explained the foreclosure didn't sit right with him. "Whoa," he murmured to his horse as they approached the hitching post outside Hartford House. The mansion stood like a monument to wealth, its brick facade and ornate trim a stark contrast to the simple wooden structures that made up most of Julesburg. Xavier adjusted his worn leather hat and dismounted. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. He'd planned this visit for the end of the day, knowing Hartford would be home from the bank, but before he'd have time to hide behind social engagements. As he approached the front porch, Xavier noticed a curtain move in one of the ground floor windows. Someone was watching him. He squared his shoulders and climbed the steps, his spurs jingling lightly with each movement. Before he could knock, the door swung open. Edmund Hartford stood in the doorway, a forced smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Evans," Hartford said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "What brings you to my home at this hour?" Xavier removed his hat, holding it in his hands. "Evening, Mr. Hartford. Thought we might have a word about some concerns the ranchers have been having." Hartford's smile tightened. Business matters are best discussed at the bank during business hours, Mr. Evans. Some matters can't wait, Xavier replied, his voice level but firm. May I come in? For a moment, Xavier thought Hartford might refuse, but then the banker stepped aside with a resigned gesture. Briefly. I have dinner plans this evening. Xavier stepped into the opulent foyer, feeling immediately out of place among the imported furniture and oriental carpets. His dusty boots and worn denim stood in stark contrast to Hartford's tailored suit and polished shoes. What exactly is this about? Hartford asked, leading Xavier into a study filled with leather-bound books that looked as if they'd never been opened. Xavier placed his hat on a side table. Bill Wilkins' place. The numbers don't add up. According to his records, he should have had another 6 months before any risk of foreclosure. Hartford's jaw tightened momentarily before he forced another smile. Mr. Wilkins was behind on several payments. I'm afraid his record-keeping wasn't as meticulous as he believed. He showed me his receipt book, Xavier countered. Every payment documented, signed by your teller. Perhaps we should discuss this tomorrow at the bank, where I have access to the official records. A sound from below interrupted their conversation, a muffled cry that might have been mistaken for the house settling if Xavier hadn't been raised in a family of 7 siblings. He knew the sound of a human voice trying to be heard. Hartford cleared his throat loudly. As I was saying, these matters are better discussed. What was that? Xavier asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. The wind in the chimney, Hartford replied quickly. This old house makes all manner of sounds. Another cry, this one more distinct. Help, please, someone help. Xavier's hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip. That ain't the wind, Hartford. The banker's demeanor changed instantly, his cordial facade crumbling into something harder, more dangerous. This is my home, Evans. What happens here is my business, not if someone's in trouble. Xavier moved toward the sound, which seemed to be coming from a door at the back of the study. Hartford stepped between Xavier and the door. Leave now, or I'll have the sheriff charge you with trespassing. Sheriff Dixon. Xavier allowed himself a small smile. The same sheriff who's been looking into the strange coincidence of 4 ranchers losing their land to your bank in the past 6 months. I reckon he'd be mighty interested in what's making those sounds in your cellar. Hartford's hand moved to his desk drawer, and Xavier drew his revolver with the smooth efficiency of a man who had used it before. Don't. The banker froze, his hand hovering over the drawer. You're making a terrible mistake, Evans. The only mistake would be ignoring someone calling for help. Xavier gestured with his gun. Open that door. For a long moment, the 2 men stood locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, with deliberate slowness, Hartford removed a key ring from his pocket. You'll regret this. Open it, Xavier repeated. Hartford approached the door, inserted a key into the lock, and swung it open to reveal a wooden staircase descending into darkness. The cries grew louder, clearer. Hello, Xavier called down into the gloom. Who's down there? Please help me. A woman's voice responded, the words breaking with emotion. He locked me in. I'm trapped. Xavier's gaze hardened as he turned back to Hartford. What have you done? She's my housekeeper, Hartford said dismissively. She was stealing from me. I was simply holding her until the sheriff could come. That's a lie, the voice called up. I found his ledger. He's been stealing from everyone in town. Hartford lunged suddenly, knocking Xavier's arm aside and making a grab for the gun. They struggled, the revolver discharging with a deafening roar that sent a bullet into the ceiling. Xavier, stronger and more accustomed to physical labor, quickly overpowered the banker, forcing him to the ground. Stay down, Xavier warned, pressing his knee into Hartford's back while keeping the revolver trained on him. With his free hand, he took the key ring that had fallen during their struggle. "You'll hang for this," Hartford spat. "I doubt that," Xavier replied calmly. He quickly used his bandana to bind Hartford's hands behind his back, then secured him to a heavy desk with a letter opener thrust through the knot. Only then did Xavier descend the cellar stairs, revolver still at the ready in case Hartford had accomplices below. The cellar was dark, lit only by the fading daylight filtering through a tiny window. "Hello," he called. "Where are you?" "Here." The voice came from behind a second door, this one reinforced with iron bands. "I'm locked in." Xavier approached the door, examining the heavy padlock securing it. "Stand back," he instructed. "I'm going to shoot the lock." He heard movement within then. "I'm clear of the door." Xavier aimed carefully and fired. The padlock shattered, pieces of metal skittering across the stone floor. He holstered his weapon and pulled the broken lock free, then heaved the door open. In the dim light, he could just make out the figure of a young woman pressed against the far wall. Her dress was rumpled, her hair falling loose from what had once been a neat arrangement, but her posture remained dignified despite her circumstances. "Are you hurt, miss?" Xavier asked, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her further. "No," she replied, her voice steadier now. "Just cold and frightened." She stepped forward into what little light penetrated the cellar. "I'm Zara Wilson, Mr. Hartford's housekeeper, or I was, until I found his ledger showing how he's been cheating half the county." Xavier nodded. "Xavier Evans, I ranch outside town." "Where's this ledger now?" "He took it when he locked me down here. It should be in his study unless he destroyed it." "We'll find it," Xavier assured her. "Can you walk? We need to get you out of here and fetch the sheriff." "Yes, I can walk." Zara straightened her dress as best she could and attempted to smooth her hair. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. I was beginning to think no one would hear me." "Lucky timing," he replied, offering her his arm for support as they climbed the stairs. "I came to have words with Hartford about some financial discrepancies myself." When they reached the study, they found Hartford had nearly worked himself free of his restraints. Xavier quickly secured him more thoroughly with a proper rope from Hartford's own decorative curtains. "You'll find the ledger in the safe behind that painting," Zara said, pointing to a landscape on the far wall. "The combination is his birthday, August 17, 1834. Xavier moved the painting aside to reveal a small wall safe. "How do you know the combination?" "I've seen him open it dozens of times." He never thought the housekeeper would pay attention to such things. There was a note of bitter satisfaction in her voice. Xavier worked the combination lock, and the safe door swung open to reveal several stacks of cash and a leather-bound ledger. He withdrew the book and handed it to Zara. "This is it," she confirmed after flipping through a few pages. "It shows everything, how he's been charging double interest, recording smaller deposits than people actually made, inventing late fees. He's stolen thousands." Xavier nodded grimly. "That explains a lot. Let's get this in him to Sheriff Dixon." Hartford, who had remained sullenly silent since being restrained, finally spoke. "The sheriff works for me, Evans. This will all be sorted out in my favor by morning." Xavier considered this. "Maybe once upon a time, Hartford. But even crooked lawmen have their limits. When the whole town sees what you've done, not even Dixon can protect you." "You're making a powerful enemy," Hartford warned. "Not the first time," Xavier replied with a shrug. He turned to Zara. "Are you steady enough to help me get him to the sheriff's office, or would you rather wait here?" Zara's eyes hardened as she looked at her former employer. "I'll help. I want to see this through." Xavier nodded, impressed by her resolve. Together, they hauled Hartford to his feet and marched him out of the mansion and down Julesburg's Main Street. drawing curious stares from townsfolk still about in the evening hours. Sheriff Dixon was indeed reluctant to arrest such a prominent citizen, but when Xavier and Zara placed the ledger before him and began pointing out the discrepancies, even he couldn't ignore the evidence. Especially when several townspeople who had gathered in the commotion began to recognize their own names among Hartford's victims. "I'll keep him locked up tonight," Dixon finally conceded, "but there'll need to be a proper investigation." "There's a telegraph office in Sterling," Xavier said. "I suggest you wire the federal marshal's office first thing in the morning. This is fraud across multiple territories." Dixon nodded reluctantly. "I'll do that." As they left the sheriff's office, the sun had fully set, and the street was illuminated only by the soft glow of oil lamps from store windows. Zara suddenly seemed to sag, the adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to fade. "Miss Wilson," Xavier asked with concern, "are you all right?" "I just realized," she said quietly, "I have nowhere to go. My room was in Hartford House and all my belongings are there." Xavier considered this predicament. "The Julesburg Hotel has decent rooms. I can advance you the money until this is sorted out." Zara shook her head. "I couldn't accept that. You've already done so much." "Then perhaps Mrs. Benson at the boarding house. She's a good woman, takes in young ladies in difficult circumstances." "I have no money, Mr. Evans, and after today I doubt anyone in town will hire me." Xavier frowned. "Because you exposed Hartford. That should make you a hero, not a pariah." "You don't understand how these things work," Zara said wearily. "A woman alone, involved in scandal even if she's in the right, becomes damaged goods, especially a servant who turned on her employer." Xavier recognized the truth in her words. Frontier towns like Julesburg operated on a complex social code that could be especially unforgiving to women. "I have a proposition," he said after a moment's thought. "My ranch needs a housekeeper. The place is a mess with just me and two hands trying to keep it. It's honest work, fair pay, and you'd have your own cabin, small but private." Zara regarded him with surprise and a hint of suspicion. "You'd hire me just like that? You don't even know me." "I know you had the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it cost you everything," Xavier replied simply. "That tells me plenty about your character. The rest we can figure out as we go." For the first time since he'd met her, Zara smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. I accept your offer, at least until I can get back on my feet." "Call me Xavier," he said, returning her smile. "If we're going to be working together, we might as well use our given names." "Xavier," she repeated, "and I'm Zara." "Well, Zara, let's get your things from Hartford House, then we'll spend the night at the hotel's separate rooms," he added hastily, seeing her expression. "We'll head to the ranch in the morning." As they walked back toward the mansion, Xavier found himself studying Zara's profile in the moonlight. There was a strength to her that went beyond physical resilience, a core of determination that had allowed her to survive her ordeal and emerge with her dignity intact. It was rare to find such quality in anyone, man or woman. For her part, Zara was acutely aware of the tall cowboy beside her. His intervention had saved more than just her immediate situation. It had potentially saved her life. Hartford had not seemed inclined to let her leave that cellar alive, not with what she knew. Yet this stranger had risked himself for her without hesitation. Neither of them realized it yet, but their lives had just changed irrevocably. The events of that day would bind them together in ways they couldn't imagine, setting them on a path that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. And it all began with a locked cellar door and the sound of a woman's cry for help. The journey to Xavier's ranch the following morning was mostly silent, each lost in their own thoughts, as the wagon rumbled over the rutted trail leading away from Julesburg. Zara had recovered her few possessions from Hartford House, primarily clothing, a Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a small box containing what little jewelry she owned, mostly sentimental pieces of minimal value. Xavier watched her from the corner of his eye as he guided the horses. She sat straight-backed on the wagon seat, her profile composed despite the uncertainty she must be feeling. The morning sun caught in her auburn hair, bringing out hints of gold that he hadn't noticed in the dim light of the cellar. "It's about another hour," he said, breaking the silence. "Not much to look at compared to Hartford House, but it's peaceful." Zara turned to him with a small smile. "After yesterday, peaceful sounds perfect." They crested a gentle rise, and the landscape opened before them, rolling grassland stretching toward distant hills, dotted with the dark shapes of cattle. In the middle distance, a cluster of buildings marked Xavier's ranch, a modest but well-maintained main house, a barn, several outbuildings, and a smaller cabin set slightly apart. "Evans Ranch," Xavier said with quiet pride. "Started with 20 acres and 6 cows 8 years ago. Now it's 400 acres and nearly 300 head. You built all this yourself?" Zara asked, genuine admiration in her voice. Xavier nodded. "With these hands and a lot of stubborn determination. Had some help the past few years from my ranch hands Miguel Sanchez and John Cooper. Good men." As they approached the ranch yard, 2 men emerged from the barn. One was clearly Mexican, around 40 with a mustache and weathered features. The other was younger, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sandy hair and a lanky build. "That's them now," Xavier said. "Miguel's been with me almost from the beginning. John joined up last spring." The men watched curiously as Xavier pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. It was a simple structure, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch running its length. "Boss, we weren't expecting you back so soon," Miguel said, his accent subtle but present. "Change of plans," Xavier replied, jumping down from the wagon and moving around to help Zara descend. "Miguel, John, this is Miss Zara Wilson. She'll be working as our housekeeper from now on." The men exchanged glances, clearly surprised, but both touched the brims of their hats politely. "Madam," John said, "welcome to Evans Ranch." "Thank you," Zara replied, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance after spending a night in the cellar and another in the Julesburg Hotel's modest accommodations. "Miss Wilson uncovered some serious wrongdoing at the bank in town," Xavier explained, deliberately omitting the details of her imprisonment. "Hartford's been arrested. She needed a position and we needed a housekeeper. Seemed like Providence." Miguel nodded sagely. "That banker never did sit right with me. Too smooth, like a snake." Xavier picked up Zara's small trunk. "I'll show you to the cabin, get you settled in. Then we can discuss your duties." The cabin was a simple one-room structure with a small porch. Inside was a narrow bed, a dresser, a table with 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove for cooking and heating. A curtained-off area in one corner contained a washstand. "It's not much," Xavier said, suddenly self-conscious about the humble accommodations. "But it's private. We can bring meals to the main house, there's a proper kitchen there. Or you can cook for yourself here if you prefer solitude." "It's perfect," Zara said, and meant it. After the opulence of Hartford House, which had come with the price of Edmund Hartford's increasingly inappropriate attention, this simple cabin represented something she valued far more: independence. "I'll leave you to get settled," Xavier said, placing her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Come to the main house when you're ready, and we can talk more." Left alone, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, letting the reality of her situation sink in. 24 hours ago she had been locked in a cellar, certain she would die there. Now she was miles from Julesburg, employed by a man she barely knew, starting yet another new chapter in her life. She opened her trunk and removed her mother's Bible, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. "Guide me," she whispered to the empty room. After changing into a fresh dress, a simple navy blue garment with white collar and cuffs, and fixing her hair into a neat bun, Zara made her way to the main house. She hesitated at the door, uncertain whether to knock or enter, when Xavier appeared on the porch. "There you are," he said, his expression warming at the sight of her. "Come in. I've made coffee, not good coffee, mind you, but it's hot." The interior of the main house revealed the bachelor nature of its occupants. It was clean enough but desperately in need of a woman's touch. Mismatched furniture, utilitarian dishes stacked haphazardly in open cupboards, and a general air of functionality over comfort prevailed. Zara took it all in with a professional eye. "I can see why you needed a housekeeper," she said with a gentle smile. Xavier rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly embarrassed. "Been meaning to get things more organized, but there's always cattle needing attention or fences to mend." "Well, that's why I'm here," Zara said briskly, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. "Shall we discuss my duties and your expectations?" Over cups of truly terrible coffee, which Zara diplomatically sipped without comment, they worked out the details of her position. She would be responsible for cooking meals, cleaning the main house, mending clothes, and other domestic tasks. In return, she would receive room and board plus a modest salary, more generous, Zara noted, than what Hartford had paid her. "Is there anything else I should know?" she asked as they finished their discussion. "About the ranch or your preferences?" Xavier considered this. "I like simple food, nothing fancy. Miguel cooks with more spices than I'm used to, and John burns everything he touches. We eat early breakfast before dawn, dinner at midday, supper at dusk. The men take lunch in the field during busy seasons." He paused, then added, "And there's one more thing you should know about me." Zara tensed slightly, wondering if this was the moment when her new employer would reveal some disturbing quirk or expectation. "I don't talk much," Xavier continued. "Never have. Some folks think I'm standoffish or proud because of it, but that's not it. Words just don't come easy to me unless they need to. So if I'm quiet, it's not because I'm displeased or angry. It's just my way." Zara relaxed, surprisingly touched by this confession. "I understand. My father was the same way. Mother always said he saved his words for when they mattered most." Xavier nodded, appreciation in his eyes. "Exactly so." The first few weeks at Evans Ranch fell into a rhythm that suited Zara perfectly. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Xavier and his hands, spent the mornings cleaning and organizing the main house, prepared the midday meal, and used the afternoons for mending, baking, and other tasks. By supper time, she had usually accomplished enough to feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The men seemed to appreciate her efforts. John was openly enthusiastic about her cooking, declaring her biscuits the best this side of the Mississippi. Miguel was more reserved, but showed his approval by actually removing his hat at the table and using the napkins she had sewn. And Xavier, true to his word, said little but conveyed his gratitude through small gestures, bringing her wildflowers he found while checking the north pasture, or carving a better handle for the well pump when he noticed her struggling with it. For his part, Xavier found himself increasingly aware of Zara's presence on his ranch. It wasn't just the material improvements, though the house had never been cleaner or more organized, and they were eating better than they had in years. It was the way she had quietly inserted herself into their lives, filling empty spaces they hadn't even recognized were there. He noticed the way sunlight caught in her hair as she hung laundry on the line, the slight furrow in her brow when she concentrated on a difficult stain, the surprising melody of her laugh when John told one of his exaggerated tales at supper. He found himself looking for reasons to be around the house more, fixing things that didn't strictly need fixing or checking supplies that could have waited. One evening, about a month after Zara's arrival, Xavier was sitting on the porch after supper, whittling a piece of pine wood when she emerged from the house with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might like some," she said, offering him one. "It's better than what you made that first day." Xavier accepted the cup with a chuckle. That wouldn't be difficult. Zara sat in the chair beside him, watching as the last colors of sunset painted the western sky. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "So open. In Boston, buildings blocked most of the sky. And at Hartford House, I was too busy to notice much of anything." "Have you had any word about Hartford?" Xavier asked. They had received news the week before that the banker had been transferred to Denver to await trial. "Sheriff Dixon sent a message yesterday. The federal marshal is gathering evidence from other towns where Hartford had business interests. They've found similar discrepancies everywhere." Zara sipped her coffee. "They want me to testify when the trial begins." Xavier's hand stilled on his carving. "In Denver?" "Yes, probably next month." She glanced at him. "I know it's an inconvenience. If you need to find someone else for while I'm gone—" "No," Xavier interrupted. "Your position will be waiting when you return. It's just—" He trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Just what?" Zara prompted gently. Xavier set aside his carving and coffee, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his features were cast in shadow, but his eyes remained clear and direct. "I'd worry about you traveling alone," he finally said. "Denver can be rough. And Hartford has people who benefited from his schemes. You might not be safe." Zara was touched by his concern. "I'll be under the marshal's protection. Even so." Xavier picked up his knife again, turning it in his hands. "I've been thinking I might accompany you. I have business in Denver anyway, a cattle buyer I've been meaning to meet with." Zara studied his profile, suspecting there was no cattle buyer, or at least none that couldn't wait. "That would be very kind of you." Xavier nodded, seemingly satisfied with this resolution. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely and stars began to appear overhead. "My father used to say that stars are windows in heaven," Zara said eventually. "That our loved ones who have passed on look through them to check on us." Xavier was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not respond. Then, softly, he said, "My mother believed something similar. That stars are the souls of those who have gone before. She died when I was 15. Sometimes I look up and wonder which one is hers." It was more than he had ever revealed about himself at one time, and Zara recognized the gift of his confidence. "I like to think my parents are together, sharing the same star," she offered in return. They sat together until the night air grew chilly, connected by the quiet understanding of those who have known loss. When Zara finally stood to return to her cabin, Xavier rose with her. "I'll walk you back," he said. "It's dark." "I know the way," she assured him, but didn't refuse his company. As they reached her cabin door, Xavier paused, seeming on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he simply touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Zara." "Good night, Xavier," she replied, watching as he walked back through the darkness to the main house. Inside her cabin, Zara lit a lamp and prepared for bed, her mind lingering on their conversation. There was something comforting about Xavier's steady presence, his quiet strength. She had come to rely on it more than she had realized. And if she was being honest with herself, there was something more, a warmth that spread through her whenever he was near. a flutter in her stomach when their hands accidentally touched passing a plate at dinner. Feelings she had no right to entertain toward her employer, no matter how kind he had been. Zara extinguished the lamp and climbed into bed, telling herself firmly that such thoughts were foolish. Xavier Evans had rescued her from a desperate situation and given her honest work. Mistaking gratitude for deeper feelings would only lead to embarrassment for both of them. But as she drifted toward sleep, it was Xavier's face she saw not as her rescuer or her employer, but simply as the man who had shared his thoughts about stars on a ranch house porch. The journey to Denver took 3 days by stagecoach, with stops at small towns and way stations along the route. Xavier had insisted on purchasing tickets for the most reputable line, ensuring they would have relatively comfortable accommodations each night. They were joined in the coach by an elderly minister and his wife, a traveling salesman, and a young mother with an infant. The close quarters made private conversation difficult, but Xavier and Zara found themselves sharing occasional glances and small smiles as the coach jostled over rough roads. At their first overnight stop, as they ate a simple dinner at the way station's dining room, Xavier noticed Zara wincing slightly as she rotated her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Just stiff from the journey," she replied. "I'm not accustomed to sitting so long in one position." That evening, as Zara prepared to retire to the women's dormitory, Xavier awkwardly presented her with a small pillow he had purchased from the station keeper. "For your back," he explained. "Might make tomorrow's travel easier." Zara accepted it with surprised gratitude, touched by his thoughtfulness. By the time they reached Denver, a comfortable familiarity had developed between them. They had discussed books they had read, shared observations about the changing landscape, and exchanged stories about their respective childhoods. Xavier's on a small farm in Missouri. Zara's in a Boston neighborhood of tradespeople and shopkeepers. Denver itself was a revelation to Zara. Though not as large or established as Boston, it had an energy and bustle that Julesburg lacked. Multi-story buildings lined the main streets, and the sidewalks were crowded with people of all descriptions: businessmen in suits, miners in rough clothes, ladies in fashionable dresses, and cowboys similar to Xavier. The federal courthouse where Hartford would be tried was an imposing stone building near the center of town. After securing rooms at a nearby hotel, Xavier accompanied Zara to meet with the prosecutor, a serious young man named Thomas Ridgway, who had been appointed by the territorial governor. "Miss Wilson, your testimony will be crucial," Ridgway explained after reviewing her statement. "You're the only witness who actually saw Hartford's private ledger and can verify its contents." "I understand," Zara replied. "When will the trial begin?" 3 days from now." "The judge is currently hearing another case." Ridgway shuffled some papers on his desk. "In the meantime, I must ask you not to discuss your testimony with anyone. Hartford has many influential friends, even here in Denver." Xavier, who had remained silent during the exchange, leaned forward slightly. "Is Miss Wilson in any danger?" Ridgway hesitated. "We have no specific reason to believe so, but caution is advisable. Hartford stands to lose everything if convicted." "She won't be alone," Xavier stated firmly, his tone making it clear this wasn't open to debate. Outside the courthouse, Zara turned to Xavier with concerned eyes. "You don't really think someone might try to harm me, do you?" Xavier considered his response carefully. "Probably not. But men like Hartford don't accept defeat easily. Better safe than sorry." He insisted on accompanying her everywhere over the next 3 days to meals, on walks through the city, even waiting outside shops when she needed to make purchases. Zara found his protectiveness both touching and slightly amusing, especially when he glared suspiciously at a harmless elderly gentleman who had merely asked her for directions. The night before the trial was set to begin, they dined at the hotel restaurant. Zara wore her best dress, a dark green garment with modest lace trim that she had carefully pressed for the occasion. Xavier, too, had made an effort, wearing a clean white shirt and black vest instead of his usual work clothes. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he asked as they waited for their meal. Zara smoothed her napkin in her lap. "A little. I've never testified in court before, and I haven't seen Mr. Hartford since that night." "You'll do fine," Xavier assured her. "Just tell the truth exactly as it happened." "That's what concerns me," Zara admitted quietly, reliving it all, the fear I felt in that cellar, not knowing if anyone would find me. Xavier's hand moved across the table to cover hers briefly. "I found you, and Hartford can't hurt you now." The warmth of his touch lingered even after he withdrew his hand, sending a flutter through Zara's chest that had nothing to do with anxiety about the trial. Their meal arrived: roast beef with potatoes and vegetables, more elaborate than their usual fare at the ranch. As they ate, the conversation turned to lighter topics. The unusual fashions they had observed in Denver, the plans for the upcoming cattle drive Xavier would lead in the fall, the flower garden Zara hoped to plant near her cabin. It felt, Zara realized with a start, very much like what courting couples might discuss. The thought brought a blush to her cheeks that she hoped Xavier wouldn't notice in the restaurant's dim lighting. After dinner, Xavier suggested a short walk to settle their meal. The evening was pleasant, with a cool breeze offsetting the lingering warmth of the day. They strolled along the main street, now quieter as businesses closed for the night. "Thank you for coming with me," Zara said as they turned back toward the hotel. "I feel much braver knowing you're here." Xavier glanced down at her, his expression softening in a way she had rarely seen. "You're plenty brave on your own, Zara Wilson. You stood up to Hartford when most folks would have looked the other way." "It wasn't bravery," she protested. "It was outrage. Those people trusted him with their savings, their futures. That's exactly what bravery is, doing what's right even when it's risky." Xavier paused, then added, "It's one of the things I admire most about you." The simple statement, delivered in his straightforward manner, affected Zara more deeply than flowery compliments from other men ever had. "Thank you," she said softly. They had reached the hotel entrance. Inside, they would go their separate ways, Zara to the women's floor, Xavier to the men's. Neither seemed eager to end the evening. "Would you like to sit a while?" Xavier suggested, gesturing to the small veranda with its rocking chairs. Zara nodded, and they settled into adjacent chairs, watching as the last of the evening traffic passed by on the street below. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the gentle creaking of the rockers. "Zara," Xavier said finally, his voice lower than usual, "there's something I've been meaning to tell you." She turned to look at him, her pulse quickening at his serious tone. "Yes." Before he could continue, the hotel door swung open and the desk clerk stepped out. "Miss Wilson, there's a message for you." Zara accepted the folded note with a murmured thank you. Opening it, she read the brief message, her expression growing troubled. "What is it?" Xavier asked. "It's from Mr. Ridgway, the prosecutor. He wants to meet with me tonight, says there's been a development in the case." She checked the small watch pinned to her dress. "In half an hour at his office." Xavier frowned. "That's unusual timing." "Perhaps he received new evidence," Zara suggested. "He does say it's urgent." "I'll come with you," Xavier decided, standing. Zara rose as well. "I should change into something less conspicuous. A woman in a fine dress out late at night might attract unwanted attention." They agreed to meet in the lobby in 15 minutes. Zara hurried to her room, changing quickly into a simpler dress and adding a shawl to shield her face. When she returned to the lobby, Xavier was waiting, his gun belt now visible beneath his open jacket. The streets of Denver were quieter now, though saloons and certain other establishments still showed lights and activity. Xavier kept Zara close to his side as they made their way back toward the courthouse and the adjacent building where Ridgway kept his office. "Something doesn't feel right," Xavier murmured as they approached. "The building's dark." Zara peered up at the rows of windows, all unlit except for a single lamp visible in a ground-floor office. That must be him working late. Xavier's hand moved to his revolver. "Stay behind me." They entered the building cautiously. The main corridor was dimly lit by a single gas lamp, its flame turned low. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the marble floor as they approached the door marked T. Ridgway, Territorial Prosecutor. Xavier knocked firmly. After a moment, the door opened to reveal not Ridgway but a tall, broad-shouldered man Zara didn't recognize. "Miss Wilson?" the man asked, his gaze sliding past Xavier to focus on her. "Who's asking?" Xavier countered, his body tense. "Miss Wilson is expected," the man replied, ignoring Xavier's question. "Please come in." Xavier's hand closed around Zara's arm, holding her back. "Where's Ridgway?" Mr. Ridgway was called away on urgent business. "I'm his assistant." The man's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "He left instructions for me to brief Miss Wilson on the new developments." "You have a name," Xavier persisted. The man's smile tightened. "Williams. Now, if you'll excuse us, this is a private matter." "I'll wait inside with Miss Wilson," Xavier stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. Williams' expression darkened. "That won't be necessary. This won't take long." Xavier's hand moved subtly toward his gun. "I insist." The standoff lasted only seconds before Williams shrugged and stepped aside. "As you wish." As they entered the office, Xavier kept himself between Zara and Williams, his senses alert for danger. The room was sparsely furnished: a desk, several chairs, and filing cabinets along one wall. A single lamp provided minimal illumination. "Please sit." Williams gestured to the chairs before the desk. Xavier remained standing, positioning himself so he could watch both Williams and the door. "What's this new development?" Williams moved behind the desk, opening a drawer. "A witness has come forward with evidence that contradicts Miss Wilson's claims about Hartford's ledger." Zara leaned forward. "That's impossible. I saw it with my own eyes." "Nevertheless," Williams continued, his hand still in the drawer, "the prosecutor needs to reevaluate the strength of the case." Xavier's instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The setup, the timing, Williams' evasiveness, none of it made sense for a legitimate meeting. "Show us this new evidence," he demanded. Williams' hand emerged from the drawer holding not papers, but a revolver. "I'm afraid there is no new evidence, Miss Wilson, but there will be one fewer witness against Mr. Hartford." Xavier drew his own gun with lightning speed, pushing Zara to the floor as Williams fired. The bullet whizzed over their heads, embedding itself in the wall behind them. Xavier returned fire, his shot catching Williams in the shoulder and spinning him backward. The wounded man staggered but managed to raise his gun for another shot. Xavier fired again, this time hitting Williams squarely in the chest. The man collapsed behind the desk with a heavy thud. "Are you hurt?" Xavier asked urgently, helping Zara to her feet while keeping his gun trained on the fallen attacker. "No," Zara gasped, her face pale with shock. "Is he?" Xavier approached the desk cautiously, checking Williams' pulse. "Dead," he confirmed grimly. The office door burst open, and two men with guns rushed in, not more attackers, but a night watchman and a police officer who had heard the gunshots. "What in blazes is going on here?" the officer demanded. "This man tried to kill Miss Wilson," Xavier explained, slowly holstering his weapon. "She's a witness in the Hartford fraud case." The next hour passed in a blur of questions and explanations. The real Thomas Ridgway was summoned from his home, bleary-eyed and confused, confirming he had sent no message and had no assistant named Williams. A search of the dead man's pockets revealed a substantial sum of money and a note with Zara's name and hotel. "Hired gun," the police captain concluded. "Hartford must have arranged it before he was transferred to our jail. We'll need statements from both of you." By the time they were allowed to return to their hotel, it was well past midnight. Zara was visibly shaken, her hands trembling slightly as Xavier escorted her through the now deserted streets. "You saved my life," she said quietly as they reached the hotel. "Again." Xavier shook his head. "You would have seen through their trap eventually. You're too smart to be fooled for long." "I nearly walked right into it," Zara countered, "if you hadn't been suspicious." They had reached the staircase where they would part ways to their respective floors. Xavier turned to her, his expression grave in the dim light of the hotel lobby. "I nearly lost you tonight," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's twice now I've found you in mortal danger. I'm not sure my heart can take a third time." Zara looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "What are you saying, Xavier?" He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "What I started to tell you earlier before that message came. I've been alone a long time, Zara. Built my ranch, lived my life, never thought I needed anything more. Then you came along and suddenly everything changed. The house feels like a home now. There's laughter at the dinner table. I find myself looking forward to evenings on the porch just talking with you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. "I'm not good with words, never have been, but I need to say this plainly. I care for you, Zara Wilson, more than as my housekeeper, more than as my friend." Zara's heart thundered in her chest. "Xavier." "You don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "I know this isn't the right time with everything that's happened. I just couldn't go another day without telling you." Zara's free hand moved to touch his face, her fingertips brushing against the stubble on his jaw. "I've been fighting these feelings for weeks," she admitted softly. "Telling myself it was improper that you were my employer, that you couldn't possibly see me as anything more." Xavier's eyes widened slightly. "Then you—" "Yes," Zara whispered, a smile breaking through her lingering fear. "I care for you too, Xavier Evans. More than I thought possible after knowing someone for so short a time." For a moment, they simply stood there, the revelation hanging between them like a tangible thing. Then, with exquisite gentleness, Xavier leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a kiss. Zara answered by rising on her toes to meet him, her hand sliding to the back of his neck as their lips met more firmly. It was a brief kiss, sweet and full of promise, mindful of their public location despite the late hour when they parted. Xavier's smile transformed his usually serious face. "We should get some rest," he said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will be difficult enough with the trial. And the day after that?" Zara asked. "The day after that we head home," Xavier replied, "and figure out what comes next together." Zara squeezed his hand once more before reluctantly releasing it. "Good night, Xavier." "Good night, Zara," he answered, watching as she ascended the stairs. In her room, Zara touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the gentle pressure of Xavier's kiss. Despite the danger they had faced, despite the trial still to come, she felt lighter than she had in years. Whatever happened next, she would no longer face it alone. The trial of Edmund Hartford lasted 4 days. Zara's testimony on the first day was clear and compelling, her quiet dignity winning over the jury despite Hartford's attorney's attempts to discredit her as a disgruntled former employee. Xavier sat in the courtroom each day, his steady presence a reminder that she was no longer alone. The attempted assassination, far from silencing Zara, had backfired spectacularly for Hartford. Evidence linking the hired gun to the banker was discovered, resulting in additional charges of witness tampering and conspiracy to commit murder. On the fourth day, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Hartford was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, his assets seized to repay his victims. As they left the courthouse for the final time, Zara felt a profound sense of closure. "It's really over," she said as they descended the stone steps. "Justice done," Xavier agreed. "The money won't bring back the Wilkins farm or the others Hartford ruined, but at least he can't hurt anyone else." They had arranged to leave Denver the following morning, having extended their stay to accommodate the full trial. Their last evening in the city was spent with a celebratory dinner, followed by a stroll through a small park near their hotel. "I've been thinking," Xavier said as they walked arm in arm along a tree-lined path. "About us." Zara glanced up at him. In the days since their first kiss, they had shared several more, each one deepening their connection. But they had avoided discussion of what would happen when they returned to the ranch. "What are your thoughts?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the sudden fluttering in her stomach. Xavier guided her to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. Once they were seated, he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I hired you as my housekeeper," he began. "And you've been the finest one any man could ask for, but that's not what I want anymore." Zara's breath caught. "What do you want, Xavier?" "A partner," he said simply. "Someone to share my life with, not just my house. Someone to build a future with." His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "I want you, Zara Wilson, not as my employee but as my wife." Though she had begun to hope for this, the actual words still took her breath away. "Xavier, I know it's fast," he continued. "We've known each other only a few months. If you need time to consider—" "Yes," Zara interrupted, a radiant smile spreading across her face. Xavier blinked. "Yes, you need time." "Yes, I'll marry you," she clarified, laughing at his momentary confusion. "I don't need time to know what my heart already understands." The smile that broke across Xavier's face was like sunrise after the darkest night. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, Xavier reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this for 3 days, waiting for the right moment." From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to me before he passed, said to save it for when I found someone special enough to wear it." Zara extended her left hand, watching with wonder as Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like its new owner," Xavier replied. And though the words might have sounded practiced from another man, from him, they were simply honest emotion. They returned to the hotel hand in hand, their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Colorado sky. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together, the quiet cowboy and the brave young woman who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. The journey back to Julesburg seemed shorter than the trip to Denver had been, perhaps because they were no longer two separate people traveling together, but a couple with shared plans and dreams. They spent the hours in the stagecoach discussing their future, how they would reorganize the ranch house now that Zara would be living there, whether to have a small wedding or simply visit the minister in town, which of the upstairs rooms would make the best nursery someday. Miguel and John were waiting at the Julesburg station when the stage arrived, having come to town for supplies. Their surprise at seeing Xavier and Zara's clasped hands quickly gave way to genuine delight when Xavier announced their engagement. "About time, boss," Miguel said with a knowing smile. "The way you've been mooning around since Miss Wilson arrived, we figured it was coming." "Was I that obvious?" Xavier asked, a flush creeping up his neck. "Like a lovesick calf," John confirmed cheerfully, tipping his hat to Zara. "Congratulations, madam. You're getting a good man." "The best," Zara agreed, smiling up at her fiancé. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Julesburg, with Miguel and John as witnesses and Mrs. Benson from the boarding house helping Zara prepare. For her wedding dress, Zara wore a simple gown of ivory satin that Mrs. Benson had helped her alter from one of her better dresses, adorned with lace salvaged from her mother's wedding veil. Xavier, clean-shaven for the occasion and wearing a new black suit, watched with undisguised awe as Zara walked toward him down the short aisle. The minister's words washed over them as they stood hand in hand, but both would later remember most clearly the moment they spoke their vows, promises made not just with words but with the certainty of hearts that had found their home. Their wedding night was a gentle discovery of each other, Xavier's natural reticence giving way to tender words of love as they learned together the language of touch and intimacy. Zara, who had feared this aspect of marriage might be awkward or difficult, found instead a profound connection that transcended physical pleasure. Life at Evans Ranch settled into a new pattern. Zara was no longer the housekeeper, but the mistress of the house, though she still took pride in maintaining their home. Xavier found himself talking more than he ever had, sharing thoughts and observations with his wife that he had previously kept to himself. They hired a young woman from town, Jenny Miller, to help with household chores as the ranch expanded. Under Xavier and Zara's joint management, Evans Ranch prospered, adding more cattle and land. They built a new, larger barn and expanded the main house to include a proper dining room where they often hosted neighbors and friends. Word of Hartford's conviction spread throughout Colorado territory, and many of his former victims stopped by the ranch to thank Zara personally for her role in bringing him to justice. Some of them, having received restitution from Hartford's seized assets, were able to start over, though others had lost too much to fully recover. The Wilkins family, whose plight had initially brought Xavier to Hartford House that fateful day, managed to buy back a portion of their former property. They became close friends with the Evanses, their children playing together during Sunday visits after church. A year after their wedding, Zara gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas, after Xavier's father. He was a quiet baby with his father's thoughtful eyes and his mother's determined chin. "He's going to be just like you," Zara predicted as she watched Xavier rock their son to sleep one evening. "A man of few words but deep feelings." "Heaven help us if he inherits your courage," Xavier replied with a smile. "We'll never keep him out of trouble." "Our son will be exactly who he's meant to be," Zara said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "And we'll love him for it." Thomas was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor, named for Zara's mother. Unlike her brother, Eleanor was a talkative child from her earliest days, filling the ranch house with happy chatter. One evening, as their 5th wedding anniversary approached, Xavier and Zara sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset while their children played in the yard under Jenny's watchful eye. The ranch had grown significantly, now spanning nearly 1,000 acres with several hundred cattle, and a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as Kansas City. "You ever think about that day?" Xavier asked, his fingers laced through Zara's. When I broke down Hartford's cellar door. Sometimes, Zara admitted. Though less often now, it seems like another lifetime. Xavier nodded. I've been thinking lately about what might have happened if I hadn't gone to Hartford's house that evening. If I'd waited until the next day or the day after. Zara squeezed his hand. I try not to dwell on that. It's too frightening to consider. I believe we would have found each other anyway, Xavier said with quiet conviction. Some things are meant to be. The quiet cowboy and the imprisoned housekeeper, Zara teased gently. It does sound like destiny when you put it that way. Xavier smiled, pulling her closer against his side. I may not talk as much as other men, but I knew from the moment I saw you in that cellar that you were someone special. It just took me a while to find the right words. Your actions spoke clearly enough, Zara replied. You've been rescuing me since the day we met. And you've been saving me right back, Xavier countered. From loneliness, from a life half-lived, you brought light into my world, Zara. As twilight deepened into dusk, they called the children in for supper, a family united by love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. Later, as they prepared for bed, Zara paused by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. You think they can see us? She asked softly. Our parents watching from their stars. Xavier came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. I hope so, he murmured against her hair. I hope they know how happy we are. I never expected this life, Zara confessed. When I came west, I was simply trying to survive. I never dreamed I would find such happiness. That makes two of us, Xavier said. I thought the ranch was enough, that I didn't need anything more. How wrong I was. They stood together at the window for a long moment, the vast Colorado night sky stretching above them, filled with stars that might or might not be the souls of loved ones watching over them. Either way, they were at peace, their journey from a locked cellar to a home filled with love complete. The lives of Xavier and Zara Evans continued to unfold with the changing seasons of the Colorado Territory. Their ranch flourished under their joint care, becoming one of the most respected operations in the region. Their family grew with the addition of a third child, James, born 3 years after Alina. The Evans children became known in Julesburg for their blend of their mother's quick intelligence and their father's steadfast character. News reached them occasionally about Edmund Hartford. The former banker served his sentence in the territorial prison, his health failing in the harsh conditions. He died there in the winter of 1889, having served little more than half his term. Zara received the news with a quiet nod, saying only, "May God judge him more mercifully than he judged others." As Colorado achieved statehood and the frontier gradually gave way to civilization, Xavier and Zara adapted their ranch operations to changing times. They invested in better breeding stock, improved their pasture management, and eventually added sheep to their cattle operation despite initial resistance from neighboring ranchers. Xavier remained a man who preferred action to words, but with Zara and their children, he found his voice. Around the dinner table each evening, he would share stories of his youth or observations about the day's work. His naturally quiet nature enriched rather than overwhelmed by his family's livelier dispositions. Zara never returned to being anyone's housekeeper, but she maintained their home with the same care she had shown when first employed. More importantly, she became known throughout the region for her unwavering integrity and willingness to stand up for those in need. When a dispute arose over water rights that threatened smaller ranchers, it was Zara who organized them into a coalition that successfully negotiated fair access for all. In the spring of 1895, 17 years after Xavier had broken down a cellar door and found his future wife, They celebrated their anniversary with a party that brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. The Evans Ranch was now a showplace, with a larger main house, several outbuildings, and well-maintained pastures stretching as far as the eye could see. After the guests had gone and their children were asleep, Xavier and Zara walked hand in hand under a sky brilliant with stars. Though lines now etched both their faces and silver threaded through their hair, they moved together with the comfortable familiarity of two people who had grown together through life's joys and challenges. 17 years, Zara mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you came charging into that cellar. Xavier smiled down at her, the expression coming more easily to him now than it once had. Best thing I ever did, breaking down that door. And breaking your silence about love, Zara added, recalling how difficult it had been for him to express his feelings in those early days. Some things are worth finding the words for, Xavier replied, drawing her close. As they stood together beneath the vast Colorado sky, Xavier Evans and Zara Wilson Evans were no longer the desperate housekeeper and the reticent cowboy who had found each other in extraordinary circumstances. They were partners, lovers, parents, two souls who had built a life of meaning and purpose, who had transformed a chance rescue into a love story that would be remembered long after they were gone. And somewhere above them, perhaps their parents were indeed watching from their stars, smiling down on the family their children had created, a legacy of love that had begun with a locked cellar door, a cowboy's courage, and the words that had finally broken his silence.